programme, and we're going to address a number of different issues through the evening. It's a special edition in part forced on us by circumstances. The usual preparations for the Monday night Skwawk Talk were disrupted over the weekend when two of my family independently ended up having to go to accident and emergency, and me going along with them, and my wife being in hospital at the moment. So I will wish her a speedy recovery, and I hope she's not giving the nurses too much of a hard time as an ex-nurse herself. So it's been quite a busy weekend, politics-wise, news-wise, plenty to talk about. We will kick off on events in Bristol. And I will say right at the beginning that, you know, nobody on this program in any way condones violence. We don't condone trashing of property, etc. And all comments should be and hopefully will be taken in that spirit. Sorry, just getting a message coming in. And I'm very pleased to be joined tonight by Bonnie Craven, one of my colleagues at Socialist Telly, and we'll hopefully be bringing other members of the program in as and when they become available to have a chat. And if the tech works, we will bring some questions through from people watching, whether that be on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube. So Bristol, very, very shocking and sad scenes last night of, you know, what started off as a big and very peaceful protest, ending up not peaceful at the end when there was, I think, you know, so according to reports, about 500 people left out of about 10,000 who were there initially. And there have been a number of, you know, theories, conspiracies, concerns, whatever else you want to call them, going around about the way that the events unfolded there. And they seem to have, a lot of them seem to have centered around a particular police vehicle that was on fire, and somebody spotted that the vehicle didn't have a valid MOT, which made them wonder whether or not that vehicle was there purely in order to be burned and give the impression of vandalism and riot by the crowds. Police cars don't need to have MOTs. They are serviced in approved workshops, and, you know, we can debunk that one pretty quickly up front. There's no significance to the fact that it had expired on this 2017 police car. They would normally expire when they get to the end of their 3-year kind of exemption period at the beginning, because police cars and vehicles are generally exempt as long as they're maintained in approved workshops. So that would, in this instance, explain why that was, and remove hopefully any questions over whether that was there as a plant. However, there do remain some questions over what, you know, how the events there unfolded, because there have been, well, lots of media reports claiming that the violence started with the crowd, and reports from people who were there saying that the violence started with action by the police. And there has been one particular worrying bit of footage, which, if it works, I'm going to show now, which shows the one of the particular incidents where the police were using batons and riot shields and reportedly pepper spray on members of the crowd protesting. You know, but there's also footage from the other side of that, which raises some questions. Let's say, you know, I wouldn't put anything more conclusive on it than that, but it's worth having a look. Let's see if this works. So what we have here is the footage, which has been praised by some members of even of Keir Starmer's front bench, as showing the police making a proportionate response, even though you clearly see some of them hitting out with sticks. And this appears to have taken place before the kind of worst of the wreckage and so on kicked off, because the police, you can see that it's light, and obviously it was getting later in the evening when things really started to kick off, and already dark by then. So at this point, police are already using batons on people who were standing there, appearing to do not much more than hold placards.
Everyone just circle around the back. Shame on you!
So that doesn't look great, that has to be said. obviously it's difficult from that point to from that viewpoint to see what's happening on the other side of that line of police, apart from a few people at the front who have placards. But there was some footage put out onto Facebook and other places which showed the same scene and the same events happening from the other side. Let's have a look and see what that shows. So at this point, this is from the other side of that line. And you can see that there's a particular character here, if we can get him in a better shot, wearing a hoodie with a bag on, with a grey hat. And he's chatting to one of the police behind the line, guy with a big red beard. And they seem to be having quite a friendly chat. There's a few smiles going on. And he's obviously pointing at something and either asking for where to go or pointing out where he wants to be. Another guy follows him here, and we're not sure whether they're together. The police officer looks around after them a couple of times. Excuse the angles on this. This is just what's available. Seems to be quite interested in where this guy's going. And then as the footage zooms in onto the front of the line, you see that as the guy arrives at the front, that's when everything kicks off. So there is a point about to come up where you can see this, what appears to be the same guy. We can't say for sure, but the same guy in a grey hat. And as we'll see in a minute, with a hoodie. There he is on the right-hand side of the screen there at the moment. You can still see him. And this is at the point where everything kicks off. So we see that a police officer waves the guy through, and coincidentally or otherwise, that's the point when the guy reaches the front of the line, or appears to, that things really seem to kick off. So, I mean, Bonnie, what do you make of that from a point of view of somebody who's only just seen the footage?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to see if it's definitely the same guy. If it is, I think it's worth asking some serious questions of the police force. As Steve said, as you said, Steve, at the start of this, we don't condone any of this appalling behaviour. It's not the way to make changes and what have you. But if it is the same guy, it does raise some questions.
Yes, I think it does, and the media have been very quick to jump in and to make the government's case for them, really, because the Tories have tried to unsurprisingly use this to justify the policing bill that the people were there to protest about, and say, well, look, if this is what kicks off, then we're completely right to be wanting to have this bill put in place, so that which puts in really extreme penalties even for merely causing annoyance. So a protest that's annoying can be punished by a 10-year prison sentence, even if it's entirely peaceful.
Yeah.
And that's what people were there to protest peacefully about until things went wrong later on. But it does raise the question of whether or not there was some level of provocation, or whatever else you want to call it. Again, responding to the provocation in the way that people did, if that's what they did, then we don't condone that in the least. However, I mean, if you go back, just 12 years, former Lib Dem MP Tom Brake, who was the Lib Dem frontbencher, I think, shortly after that, and at the time he was a member of the Home Affairs Select Committee in the Commons, so quite senior. And he, in spite of being a Home Affairs specialist, accused the Metropolitan Police of using undercover police officers to incite the protesters who were there to protest the G20 event, G20, that they were there undercover in order to kick off the violence and cause problems that that could be used against the crowd later on. And he said that he saw two people in plainclothes showing their warrant cards. This is all on record on the Guardian website still. And they showed the warrant cards, were let through the cordon by the police, and shortly afterwards were seen carrying out violent acts. So that's a matter of record. So it's not completely out of left field, for want of a better term, to say that could happen. I'm not saying it didn't happen last night, but I think it needs to be investigated before people jump to conclusions.
Well, I think as much as anything as well, it is at least a question of proportionality, isn't it? I mean, it's not that long since we saw women being brutalised at a peaceful vigil in Clapham Common. The media are going to be very quick to try and paint similarities between the two events, and try and create a causal link. But what we certainly saw in Clapham was policing that wasn't appropriate for the circumstances. I mean, I was raised going to demonstrations and protests from being a small child, and I've now got children of my own, and I've gone to pretty much every London protest and demonstration that's been held, plus a few elsewhere in the country. And generally speaking, I go and I take my children just the same as I was taken. That's how confident I am that protests and demonstrations are generally safe. What I have noticed though is after dark or at certain sort of hotspots during a protest or demonstration, sometimes people come along and it feels to me like a rank and file protest, or it feels that some people come along. Now, I don't know if they're coming from the police or if they're coming from some other kind of organisation, but one of the things that has bothered me is the apparent willingness to blame a certain section of political society for the disruption and devastation and appalling acts that took place in Bristol last night.
I'll just pause you 1 second, Bonnie, because we've got Damo joining us. Welcome, Damo. Nice to have you with us. We're just on the topic of Bristol and the events in Bristol at the weekend at the moment. And I showed a short video that I published on the website not long ago that raises questions. I wouldn't put it any more strongly than that about how the violence started and what was going on to in terms of the police actions within the crowd, etc. There were Bonnie's been talking about the safety and peacefulness of protests she's been on, and as a rule, people don't go there looking to start aggro, or the vast majority of people don't. You may get small numbers who do, and again, because no doubt if we seem to be in any way not emphasizing this point enough, it will be used against us by our opponents. But we are, condemning violence, not condoning violence. And if anybody was there who was a genuine protester who ended up joining in that stuff, you've been an idiot, because you played right into the hands of the government, who would be rubbing their hands at the prospect of having something to point out that they can use to excuse this and justify this draconian law that they want to put in.
Yes.
You're our southwest representative at the moment, even though you're, I think, 200 miles away from Bristol. So
I am indeed. Yeah, it's the wrong end of the southwest, but it's a lot quieter. It's been a lot quieter down my end. But there were protests happening in Truro City. There were hundreds of people in Truro City protesting for the very same thing, but it was completely peaceful. What happened in Bristol was absolutely obscene, and we absolutely condemn anybody who instigated the violence there. And there's been a lot of questions asked about who that blame is being attributed to. There is still a lot of anger being aimed at the police, still, with Clapham Common still so fresh in our minds. But the simple fact of the matter is, whoever started it is absolutely unacceptable. We do not condone that. And as you quite rightly said, Steve, it plays it precisely into the hands of those who want to legislate against people's right to peacefully protest. It is a freedom of expression. It is freedom of speech, but it comes with responsibility as well. And people have to be responsible for their own actions. You cannot go around torching police vans or breaking the windows in a police station out of some sense of misplaced retaliation, as if they're somehow the enemy in all of this. You're aiming your fire at the wrong places. There has to be a political solution to this. We can apply pressure politically by peacefully protesting. It is how things got done previously. I mean, I know a lot of people on social media today are bringing up examples such as the poll tax riots and how that magically was the answer to Margaret Thatcher's pernicious legislation 30 years ago. But actually, it was more along the lines of people up and down the country saying, "Jail me, I dare you," and refusing to pay it, which was itself a peaceful form of protest. You just withholding your funds. Yes. It's a much more powerful, much better tool in our arsenal to use. Doing anything else, resorting to violence in any way, shape, or form, will just give them an excuse to come down harder on us. And at the end of the day, you can shout, you can scream, you can fight. but you're only going to be able to take that so far. Sooner or later, you're going to top out. You can't go any further. You can't step it up anymore. And then where are you going to be? Because you've lost all of your political capital and the sympathy of anybody else who had sympathies to your cause when you were still taking a more peaceful course of action.
Yes.
I think anyone that's trying to make out that the actions of a few criminal people last night in Bristol justify the clamping down of any sort of protesting or what have you that's peaceful is completely wrong, because quite clearly what some people were guilty of last night in Bristol were criminal offence, and that legislation already exists to organise. I've organised protests and demos myself in the last decade or so. And to organise one of those, it takes a lot of work, and you have to sort of get buy-in from the local police force so that you've got, you know, all the rights and the organisation there to keep it safe and make it effective. And we did get really good coverage because it was quite part of a coordinated sequence of protests and demonstrations around the country against the bedroom tax. But one of the other things that I've noticed as well about media coverage is, having been myself on various TUC marches and anti-austerity marches and things like that, you can have hundreds of thousands of people go on a march, and it would seem that the mainstream media are only interested in them if you get a few idiots kicking off. And I think that that's another part of the key role for independent media and non-state-led media, to make sure that people's disquiet is heard and aired properly across the media, so that people feel they're going on a protest and people are going to know about it.
And of course, with so much of our media being right-wing, the accusations were readily made that, oh, it's the loony left that are doing all of the damage. I mean, did they stop each and every one of these protesters or rioters and ask them what their particular political persuasion was? I don't think so. I don't care what your political persuasion is. Everybody should look at what those people were doing, the violence being exhibited. It was wrong. Across the spectrum, you should condemn that. It's not a right versus left issue. It's a right versus wrong issue. And for anybody to seek to politicize that or try to gain some political capital for their particular faction, their wing of British politics, is an absolute disgrace. But it's happened.
Couldn't agree more.
Yes, I'm absolutely on that. And, you know, I mean, some people have pointed out, and someone's sent me a comment about the fact that, you know, obviously it's only going to promote suspicion if the government passes a law that allows undercover police and other intelligence sources to commit crimes with impunity. If suddenly a bunch of unidentified people conveniently, you know, are seen smashing in windows at a protest, that gives them an excuse to condemn. Now we'll see. You know, we'll see who gets put on trial for that. We'll see what what the investigation brings up. But you know, there is a huge amount of suspicion generated by the way that this government is abusing our laws, abusing our social freedoms, our civil freedoms, our rights of free speech, etc. And you know, on that point, I think we'll move on to our next topic, because there's no particular shortage of things to talk about from the past few days. We've seen today Nicola Sturgeon be exonerated by whatever the title is, I forget, of the officer investigating allegations against her. And that's put the Labour leader in an embarrassing position. Bonnie, do you want to tell us a bit about that? I think you're aware.
Yeah, well, I'm not happy with the leader in Westminster telling people in Scotland what ought to be happening as a part of their democracy, first and foremost. And quite honestly, we've seen illegal contracts awarded. We've seen Matt Hancock criticised by the law for contracts that have gone out to cronies of his. It's corruption, and that's been agreed by a court. These are the people that our leader, the leader of the opposition, ought to be calling for resignations from. We've got a prime minister that's overseen more than 130,000 deaths that could have been avoidable, but have happened due to his inaction or his dangerous decisions that have been made with regards to the coronavirus. So he needs to start looking a little bit closer to home than getting involved in Scottish national politics.
Davo?
No lessons being learned at all by Keir Starmer here with regards to Scotland. I don't think anything promotes the ideal of Scottish independence, shall we say, more than Westminster figures speaking out and telling them what they should and shouldn't do. He said that Sturgeon, whether she was guilty or not, had to go, which was patently ridiculous at the time he said it. And now that she's been cleared, looks even more ridiculous. And as Bonnie said, the glaring elephant in the room is the fact not once has he called for one single Tory minister. And Hancock was the examples Bonnie given. Gavin Williamson over schools is another one. The list goes on and on and on. Boris Johnson, obviously, of course, not to mention all the money he's spaffed up against the wall, or rather his partner has, in decorating the flat at 10 Downing Street. There's so much ammunition that Keir Starmer could throw at the Conservatives, and he just doesn't do it. It's little wonder that people regard him not only as not particularly Labour, but even with accusations of being a Tory plant, and that he actually should belong on the government benches because he would be a far better fit there. It's an appalling indictment of a Labour leader, and it's little wonder his polling figures are lame, that things are looking ropey for him in Hartlepool, which is a seat Labour has never lost, but looks potentially set to. And, it just, as things go on and on and on, you would think, surely this time, Keir, you've got to change your tune. Surely you can see the writing on the wall now. And it just doesn't seem to ever sink in. He just seems determined to carry on in this calamitous direction he's taking the party, and the party's reputation with it.
Yes, and it has to. We have to keep banging on about the contrast where, we've seen Nicola Sturgeon be exonerated of something today before there was any indication that she wouldn't be exonerated. Keir Starmer was talking about her resignation. After we saw the Tory government, in particular the Department of Health and Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, be found by a court to have acted unlawfully in the way that it handled awards of contracts during the pandemic. So that's a done deal. That's a guilty verdict, such as it is. And when asked directly, should Matt Hancock resign, Keir Starmer said no. Now, it used to be that even misleading Parliament was a resignation issue in the days when there was a little bit of honour in politics on the Tory side of the benches. And, being found guilty by a court of, completely wrongly handling the award of contracts worth hundreds of millions and even billions of pounds, there's got to surely be a resignation matter. And how can a Labour leader go onto the telly and say, no, he shouldn't resign? That's not the sort of thing we should be talking about at the moment. And that's bad enough, but then a couple of weeks later to then, prejudge an issue that he ends up getting wrong and saying that Nicola Sturgeon should resign. And, the Labour's desperate in Scotland because they haven't got anything, with the current, the new leadership, they've got nothing to offer really to the Scottish voters. They're on the wrong side of the issue again in the way that they've launched their campaign in Scotland by telling the majority of people in Scotland who seem to want independence now. God, who can blame them? That they're wrong because it should all be about, keeping the United Kingdom together, etc., etc. You have to wonder, and I've seen a lot of women asking, is it a gender issue? Is it just Starmer's desperation in Scotland, or is it the fact that it's much easier for him to call for the resignation of a woman and not to call for one of a man, or that just it's less natural for him? I don't know. Bonnie, what do you make of it?
Yeah, it does make it look like this is a gender issue for Starmer, doesn't it? I mean, I think recently he talked about it being an inappropriate behaviour. Misogyny and sexism was an inappropriate behaviour. It's never appropriate. It's not okay. There is no time when it's okay to be a misogynist. And in fact, a new law has just been passed to make misogyny a hate crime. And we've got the leader of the Labour Party that's calling for a woman to step down while he's completely failing to hold the government to account. There are so many ways that Labour can set themselves separately to this awful government. And every opportunity to make a case for a change of government is just being blown away. You know, there's just no attempt to say, well, we're the alternative, we can make your life better. We're back to the bad old days of, you know, not getting a cigarette paper between the two parties. And I'm really worried about what it means for women's security as well.
Yes. Well, on a linked issue to that, we've got the Hartlepool situation, which I think has been alluded to, with the sorry, Bonnie, it looks like you're still talking on the screen. I don't want to be talking over you, but I can't hear you.
No, I'm not talking.
All right, sorry. The situation in Hartlepool with Dr. Paul Williams, who is the party's what do they call him, PPC, prospective parliamentary candidate now, for the by-election that's going to happen there in May. And he's made a flying start by being, upsetting a lot of people with his language that he's used in the past. And interestingly, the fact that he's tweeted this MILF, this acronym, mothers I'd like to, and fill in the
be
blank
friends with
itself, which is grossly insensitive at the very best, and even worse, he was doing it as part of a right-wing Labour event, because he tweeted that with a hashtag that was to do with the Progress event that was going on in 2011. And that was, his tweet seemed to indicate that was the chat that they were having around the dinner table, was about which particular Tory, more mature women with children they would prefer to have their way with. And, that given the right wing's normal proclivity for, claiming to be, that they're the victims of abuse, etc., and actually they're the ones dishing it out. We've seen what kind of thing now goes on in a right wing, around a right wing dinner table when they think nobody's watching, and he tweeted that out. But we saw Lisa Nandy on TV yesterday squirming, to avoid condemning or properly. She condemned what he said, but then said, well, he's apologized, so that as though that just makes it automatically all right. We saw, I think it was John Ashworth, refusing to talk about it because he claimed it wasn't anything to do with him. And then we've seen Keir Starmer today say that it was inappropriate. And, is inappropriate the right word? I'll put that question to our panelists here to tell me whether that's the right word to use about what he said.
Inappropriate, not an appropriate word to use, because that implies that there's an appropriate case for what he was saying, and there isn't. I think Shami Chakrabarti had it right, and if anybody wants to stand up for the women's perspective of what was going on, given that Lisa Nandy made such a complete pig's ear of it, it's Baroness Chakrabarti who said, under no circumstances, this guy's got to go. He's utterly unsuitable. And the fact that he was an MP at one point, you should damn well know better. It's misogynistic, it's awful, and it's dishonorable. And I was thinking to myself on the last question when Bonnie was speaking, all the things that Keir Starmer could attack Boris Johnson and his government over, honour is the most obvious one. As you say, there used to be an honourable thing. If somebody was found to have broken the law or done something wrong in their position of power, then they would be expected to resign, or the leader of the day would be expected to sack them. If not, and they would go in disgrace. And neither happens. And we're seeing exactly the same thing now happening in Labour, where they're falling over themselves to make excuses for their long list of one candidate, because this guy fits the bill from a factional perspective. And it's been factionalism all the way under Keir Starmer. From day one, it was never going to be about uniting the party. He has done more damage to it in 11 months that he's been leader than I've seen happen in years under the Labour Party.
Well, nobody should be too shocked about that. I mean, he has been accused plenty of times of him and his supporters in his local party running that in a similarly kind of like a fiefdom rather than a democracy as well. So that's the view of a lot of the local people who are in his constituency boundaries, who are members of the party. I mean,
my view is this guy is not fit for any form of public office. What he said there and what we've seen photographs, if they're genuine and everything else, isn't clumsy language isn't an unfortunate lapse of judgment. It betrays an absolute attitude of this man that he has towards women. And I'm absolutely sick to the back teeth of men thinking it's okay to think of women in this way. This guy not only is wanting to represent a constituency made up of men, women, no gender, transgender, whatever, a population, okay, and he is thinking of at least 50% of those in that way. Like, if I lived in Hartlepool, would I want someone who thinks like that about me, about my daughter, about my mum, about my sister? I haven't got a sister, but if I had one, my sister, and so on. Would I want them representing me in Parliament? Absolutely not. And in fact, this guy's a GP. Like, he shouldn't be practicing as a doctor if he's thinking like that. Would I want my teenage daughter, when she gets there, to be looked after by a GP like that? No, thank you. No, thank you.
Yes, I mean, you mentioned pictures, and I mean, there is one particular picture that came out, I think, the day after he'd apologised, which showed him in his scrubs with a pin board behind him, and somebody had put all the push pins into what appeared to be the word MILF, colour coding the letters as well to try to make it clearer. Now, I'm not saying that he did that, but he did tweet the picture. So either he didn't spot that it was there and somebody had pranked him, or who knows what. But again, it does make you really wonder what kind of view the powers that be now in the Labour Party have of the people of Hartlepool as well, because they seem to think, they're working class northern people. They won't mind, some sexism and misogyny. They won't mind, pretty much anything that we do. They'll, we can get away with it because, I don't know. Does the party think they're too dumb to know the difference? The other, but the shocking thing really is that's not his, in some ways, that's not his kind of only disqualifying characteristic, if you like, disqualifying his thing from his past. I mean, apart from anything, it was shoddy. So it doesn't say much for organisation to think, well, I want to be the parliamentary candidate, but I'm not going to go back and delete the tweets that I've done for, clean my account out, which, I've never tried to do, but I gather there are programs that you can get to do that for you, etc. And, it wasn't just that somebody had screen grabbed this thing years ago and then brought it out to use against him, but it was still on his timeline until the weekend. But, there's also the issue, the fact that they put in an ardent, let's say, maybe the best word for it, an ardent Remainer as a candidate forward for the Labour Party in a seat that voted more than 2/3 to leave the EU, which again seems quite shocking. And a leaked email which came out again late last week between some of the people in his local party and the Labour Party themselves referred to discussions with Lotto about what they needed to do in order to make him be the only candidate. But they said, we've got worries about the fact that he doesn't know enough about the area. And yet he's, we want Lotto, Keir Starmer's office to help us to impose this guy as the only person that we're going to put forward. I mean, it's not rocket science to think you want the most rooted, candidate in the local area you possibly can if you're going to try and win a seat that you're worried about not winning that you currently hold, and where the previous MP has resigned, under who knows what cloud, but there appear to be, there was a process going on. And they put somebody to get forward who seems to have a past that touches on similar issues, and also is the antithesis of what people in Hartlepool would want to would probably want to see in somebody that they would like to feel would represent them if they elect them.
It's coming straight back to factionalism again, Steve. He fits the mold. He fits into Team Keir. He's of the right image. He's got the right kind of politics about him. He's not a lefty. So let's get him in by hook or by crook. And I don't know if it's delusion or what, but they clearly think this guy is. Excuse you. Clearly thinks this guy is going to win it for them, but it's. I mean, are they? I mean, you they can't possibly be thinking of trying to throw this seat away. That would reflect horrendously on Keir Starmer. So clearly they think this guy's got what it takes to win it, but he's simply an awful character. I mean, apart from anything else that's been mentioned today, there's the whole junket to Saudi Arabia and his all of it, his sudden change of heart, and what a sort of a progressive place that is. But honestly, his timeline. I mean, you talk about not cleaning up your own timeline, but then we don't have to. We got nothing there that we want to hide, particularly. But for those that do, it should be politics 101 to clean your accounts up. In this day and age, you should have enough nous about you to want to make sure that things were clean and tidy. And he made no attempt, had no idea, and people had a field day. The minute he was endorsed, the minute he got that candidacy, they were all over it. And the stuff that has come out for days on end, there was more and more stuff coming out. And it's an indictment on, you know, when it's your own personal social media, this is how you think. This is your personal thoughts that you put down into a tweet. And this it gives an insight into how this guy's mind works. And it's not nice.
Yeah, I mean, you know, for the sake of kind of full accuracy on the thing, it wasn't, you know, he wasn't necessarily, as at least as I read the tweet, making his own comment about that. He was actually reporting what a bunch of them were discussing around the table. But it does make you wonder what goes on in their minds, that they think that's something that's good to tweet about, you know. Even allowing for the fact that it might have moved on a little bit in 12 years. But, you know, it links in. I mean, it links in with the Scottish issue as well, because it's a Starmer, you know, it's a Starmer issue, and it's the way that, you know, how do you treat people in the north of England that maybe look like a bit of a foreign species? I mean, it's my neck of the woods. I know that the people around there, you know, as well as I know anybody, because that's where I come from, just over the river from Hartlepool. But you know, do they look like an exotic species to Keir Starmer, Scottish people and northeasterners? I don't know. But we've seen, you know, the other thing which hasn't come out, and I'll be writing about this when I get a second, but, you know, the whole, you know, pretty much the whole exec of the Glasgow Kelvin CLP resigned at the weekend. And they resigned in protest at the way that Keir Starmer treated Holly Cameron, who was the Scottish Parliament candidate for the area, for the list, that said that she wouldn't want to see Labour standing against another referendum, an independence referendum, if the SNP did well in the Scottish elections. And Labour delisted her immediately as a candidate, deselected her. And you know, I mean, again, it's a woman, but it's also a woman who was extremely popular with the local members, and their wishes weren't taken into account for a second. You know, she had a position that was, until the recent change of leadership, the position of the party leadership. So, you know, it wasn't like she'd kept anything secret and suddenly sprung a view that was unacceptable. And she was immediately removed. So again, Westminster interference in Scottish politics, but it's seen the whole exec of Glasgow Kelvin constituency party, all the elected officers resign en masse. And with the exception of one person who didn't support them, everybody else in the CLP, the constituency party members, fully supported their decision to step down. So outraged were they in the way that the party has behaved. And they've gone further, and they've said, we're on strike in this constituency. We can't bring ourselves to campaign for somebody who's prepared to step forward and replace somebody who's been removed like that. We will campaign for the party, but we're going to do it in neighbouring constituencies. We're not going to do it in ours. So again, we're seeing Labour members so affronted by the way that the leadership is behaving that they're wanting to go on strike.
Yeah, I don't think that's unique to Scotland, though, either, Steve. Obviously, in London, we've got the GLA elections coming up, and I'm coming across a huge number of activists that want to campaign for the local candidate for the GLA, but have concerns about the mayoral candidate, who, you know, it looks like he's set to win anyway. In part, maybe the other candidates for the mayoral position are absolutely shocking, but I'm really concerned about the fact that people who've been previously incredibly active in the Labour Party are feeling the need to sort of take a back seat at the moment because they're unhappy about the removal of democracy.
Yeah, I mean, I hope Sadiq can, when he does win, because it looks very much like it's a foregone conclusion, as you say now, Bonnie, doesn't take it as a personal endorsement, but more of a luck dodging a bullet, and the fact that his opposition has been so dire. I've never known. I mean, we've watched a couple of these London mayoral elections now. I've never seen such a dire state of affairs, such an awful panel of candidates in my born days. They are poor. And yeah, as you say, Steve, up in Scotland, it's another woman. I mean, Ciara's got form for this now. Let's not forget Rebecca Long Bailey after all this time and all of this as well, because that's where it all started, and it has carried on. He will sack. It seems to be the case that he's now got a track record for sacking women, whereas he won't call for the sacking of men, especially not if they're Conservatives.
Yeah, I think point out. I mean, the sharp-eyed who might watch the program regularly will have noticed that, you know, my background is black now instead of red. Still a skyline of my city, Liverpool, but you know, the way that Liverpool has been treated, and again through women candidates in Liverpool, has been absolutely appalling. And now we've got the Tories coming in and wanting to usurp the new mayor, who's going to get elected at some point, by sending in the commissioners to take over the city, when it's not a question of, you know, mismanagement of the finances. It's the apparent findings is that there's been, you know, they think there's been corruption. Now that hasn't been proven in the court. No, you know, that's up to a court to prove. So, you know, nobody is being accused. But if you think there's an issue of corruption, remove the people that you think are corrupt. Don't come and take over the city and impose on the most socialist city in at least England and probably the UK, a bunch of Tory policies just because you think you found an excuse to do so. So, you know, I'm in mourning for the state of politics in this country at the moment. But sorry, Demo, I cut across you, but I thought it was relevant to remind people.
Be sporting black armbands this week in solidarity. But no, the last point I was going to make is I was thinking what's happened in Glasgow Kelvin. What a beautiful example of peaceful protest. Just go on strike in one constituency, but go and campaign in others. What a brilliant way of dealing with it. And since you brought the Liverpool situation up, the allegations of corruption, as you highlighted, what makes this all the worse is you've never seen a more corrupt government than the one that currently runs this country. Who are they to come in and take over the city and cite corruption as the reason for doing so, especially a city? Whereas, as far as I'm aware, you haven't a single Tory councillor whatsoever. I mean, talk about a coup. I mean,
I've had a question come in from somebody, and I think we've actually beat her to it, from Katie McDonough. She said she wants us to contrast the treatment of Paul Williams with that of Rebecca Long Bailey. So we've just touched on that, but you know, let's posit, for example, that a left winger had been in Paul Williams's case. I doubt it would have been a woman making that kind of comment. But you know, let's talk about the fact. You know, what if it had been a lefty standing in Hartlepool and this information had come up about them? How long do you think it would have taken the party to remove them, especially when they've only been in place for a day?
2 seconds.
I actually think that under the old management and leadership of the Labour Party, there is no way on earth that candidate would have been approved to stand for anything, local councillor even, let alone PPC. I mean, we're coming up to selection for council candidates at the moment. The processes are going on at the moment. And one of the things we do as an executive, we look at the candidates, we take a quick look through their social media, see if there's anything there that might bring the party into disrepute and disbar them from standing for any position. I just don't see how this guy has got through the scrutiny at all. And what I wonder as well, rather than what if Dr. Williams had been a woman, how about what if it wasn't Matt Hancock but Melanie Hancock? Would we have been calling for the resignation then? What if it wasn't Boris Johnson but it was Betty Johnson? Would we be looking for a resignation then? Sorry, in an age of the Me Too hashtag and the awful treatment of women that we've seen across politics and across the entertainment business and all sorts of other high profile arenas, is it forgivable? No, it's just not. It's just not acceptable in any way, shape or form.
No, completely agree. Yeah, well, you think about how Rebecca Long Bailey eventually went. It was on the most measly of terms that she retweeted something that somebody else had put. But for a long time, she'd been holding up Keir Starmer's desire to support the government on getting children back to school. She was determined that as shadow education secretary, she was going to keep on working with the unions to ensure that children, only returned or only able to go to school when things were safe. It was common sense, the absolute right thing to do. So naturally, Keir Starmer sacked her. Yeah, that's all I have to add to what you said, really, Bonnie. I think you covered it beautifully. Other than that,
does Dr. Williams actually does Dr. Williams like the Foo Fighters? I wonder.
Well, to be hoped not, because then he might be in trouble now. Abbas Kabir, and excuse me if I haven't pronounced that properly, wants to know why the CLP in Hartlepool didn't get a say. Well, I mean, the Dr. Williams' supporters would say that it was members of the CLP that were actually asking to have him as the candidate, and that he was extremely popular with the members. That's as might be, but that's never been put to a democratic test, because the point was, was all along to prevent members from having a say and remove any risk that anybody other than Paul Williams would become the candidate in Hartlepool. So, I think in the answer to Abbas's question is because they have contempt for the wishes of the members, frankly. As long if it doesn't agree with them, or it might not agree with them, then it isn't let's win the argument, persuade people that they should be backing who we want them to back. It's let's make sure that they don't get a vote, and we'll do everything that we can to prevent that. We saw that again, on a different touches on Bristol in a different way, but was it Bristol? No, there's one of the CLPs in London that who's had their AGM, and within a couple of days of the AGM being over, the chair who had been suspended and was now replaced by a right-wing chair because nobody else had the choice as to who to vote for, was mysteriously reinstated to the party membership a couple of days after the AGM was out of the way. And the members, understandably, they think that the reason that they are, that he was suspended was purely because that removed him from the from the equation, and the right-wing chair, who was unlikely to have won because the left won the vast majority of the other officer places, wouldn't have beaten this guy. So let's take him out, suspend him, keep him out of the way. And we've seen that done to NEC candidates. We've seen it done to people. Whenever there's a vote to win, they'll try and nobble the ones that they think are the strongest, who might pose a threat to them. And if they can't win fairly, they'll just take them out. And that's a shocking indictment, really, on the state of a party that still says on its membership cards, that Labour is a democratic socialist party, and it doesn't say it's a joke. We didn't pull that out of a cracker on a little rolled up piece of paper or anything, which is about the level that it should be at if the current regime is saying democratic and socialist. So we're coming at the last few minutes of the program, guys. I've dictated the topics, I think, too much, but tell us a little bit about anything else that you want to bring up. What's your issues going on at the minute? Bonnie, you're big in campaigning on the NHS. What's happening in your neck of the woods on that?
Oh, well, I've got an email. We've emailed Sadiq Khan and a few other people about looking for protections for our hospitals, which are under threat of being closed. I'm currently waiting. I've been told that he's concerned about the information that was brought to light, and he's going to investigate. So fingers crossed he pulls his finger out and helps us campaign to keep our hospitals open, because it wouldn't look good for the Mayor of London to sign off on removal of hospital beds, especially in the middle of a pandemic. So I've got my fingers crossed on that. And the other big thing that's happening locally, I mentioned it before, are the GLA elections. Just an interesting thing. I don't know if it works the same in other regions, but in London region, there seems to be, we'll call it a poll tax, for want of a better word, to all constituencies in London to fund the GLA campaign. And it's a flat charge to every CLP, regardless of the size of the membership and the finances and funding available to that CLP. They're looking for, and they set the amount before the election, which was due to happen last year, at £3,000 per CLP, which is an awful lot of money for a little constituency like ours. We don't have any councillors, we don't have any MPs. And I'm really concerned what they want that money for, because we're 45 days out from the election. Only just recently have we been allowed to deliver leaflets, and I still think it's questionable whether or not that's a good idea anyway, from the sake of COVID security. But £3,000, what's that to pay for? And haven't London Region got enough money to fund their own campaigns? Why are they coming to us members asking for yet more money? They've had our affiliation fees as constituency parties in London. I just think £3,000 is a rip-off, and it needs to be, if there does need to be some additional money raised, I think it needs to be proportionate to the size of the membership and the healthiness or otherwise of the bank balance. Not very socialist, is it?
Yes.
That's crippling for some smaller CLPs. I mean, that's enough to send some of them out of business, essentially. I mean, my CLP, that would be far too rich for mine. I mean, obviously, I'm way down at the pointy end, but not in London. But yeah, there are some very wealthy CLPs as well. This can be done so much better as a percentage of CLP income or assets or what have you. But why? As you say, why on earth would you want such money anyway? Are the party finances that poor now? They lost that many money, that much affiliation.
It's worth pointing out that the folk in Bristol were prevented from donating the money that they had in some abundance and wanted to give to the homeless and the hungry, and were ordered that they couldn't do that because that money had to be used to support the campaign of a candidate that they were given no choice about. They were given a choice between two right wingers, not anybody that most of the members were going to vote for. And it's not questions, it's comments on this, but I'll read them out because I think they're very apposite. So Mary Whitby has commented on Facebook and said she's agreeing with you, Bonnie. She's saying, definitely, Bonnie, the calls for women to resign are always quick, but men are given many chances and excused or protected. And Mariel Wagoner, sounds like she's down there in Bristol. She said, shout out for Lockley's branch executive, which is one of the branch parties in the city of Bristol, who resigned last Sunday over candidate in position 2. They were given a choice of 2 candidates for 2 places imposed by regional office. So you've got to pick 2. Here's 2. There's your democratic choice, like it or lump it, essentially. And that's the state of the party at the minute. So hopefully I haven't put everybody else in the same black mood I'm rocking at the moment. But I think we'll call it a day on that. But I really do appreciate everybody who's watched. Hopefully the experiment with the new format has been interesting for people. And if so, then obviously like and share. It's going to be there to watch on catch up. If you're watching on YouTube, as I saw somebody say the other day, if you like it, click like. If you don't like it, click dislike twice. And have your say on that. Get your opinion in. Thank you, Bonnie and Damo, for joining us. And
always
do keep watching Socialist Telly this week and catch up with me next week on Skwawk Talk, give or take this time Monday evening. Thank you, everybody. And